audio equipment, casting flickering shadows across my face. The room was thick with the scent of stale coffee and ozone, the air vibrating faintly with the omnipresent static. "Are you safe now? Where are you?" I asked, voice tight. "Safe enough. For now. I'm heading to the safe house. We need to regroup. They're not just after you. They want to shut us both down." The silent authority had escalated their efforts. Their reach was creeping ever closer, their shadowy presence a constant reminder that our quest was no longer just a personal obsession, but a battle against a faceless, merciless force determined to keep the city and the worlds beyond silent. I glanced at the latest recordings on my screen, the waveform flickering erratically. Among the usual static, I isolated a new voice-fragile urgent, a whisper layered with despair and hope. It was clearer than before, a plaintive plea that pierced the veil of noise. My fingers hovered over the controls, hesitant yet compelled. "Listen," I murmured, pressing play. The voice emerged, a trembling echo from the other side of the storm, a message etched in desperation. "Please, help us. Trapped. Can you hear?" A shiver ran down my spine. The voices were multiplying, their suffering growing more palpable. Each transmission was a thread, pulling me deeper into a labyrinth of lost souls and fractured realities. The weight of their silent screams pressed against my mind, blurring the edges of my own sanity. The door creaked open, and Mara slipped inside, rain dripping from her short hair, eyes sharp and haunted. "They were close," she said quietly. "I think they know what we're doing. Crow's men won't stop until they've erased every trace." I nodded, swallowing hard. The city's oppressive atmosphere was closing in. The electrical storms no longer just a backdrop, but an active participant in our unfolding nightmare. "We have to keep going," I said, voice resolute, despite the fear gnawing at my core. "If we don't, those voices, they'll remain trapped forever." Mara met my gaze, a flicker of fierce loyalty shining through the exhaustion. "Then we find a way, together." As the storm raged on, so did our resolve. The static was no longer just noise. It was a call, a haunting, desperate call that we could not ignore. And as the city trembled beneath the electric sky, I knew the cost of silence was far greater than we had ever imagined. But the question lingered in the charged air. At what price would our voices finally break through the storm? The hunt was no longer just for answers. It was for survival, for connection, for the chance to bring light to the darkest frequencies of existence. And as the night deepened, so did the shadows that watched and waited. I adjusted the dials, the faint echo of a new voice, threading through the static, fragile, yet unmistakable. "Help us. Please." And with that, the storm outside seemed to hold its breath, the city poised on the edge of an uncertain dawn. The small laboratory smelled of ozone and cold metal, the faint hum of machines filling the air like an unending electrical heartbeat. I stood stiffly in the center of the room, my eyes flickering between the array of devices that blinked and pulsed with cryptic data. Dr. Kalen Sato, thin and pale as ever, hovered over a peculiar contraption, a tangle of wires, coils, and screens that seemed to breathe with static energy. His glasses caught the dim light, reflecting 1,000 fractured images that made his gaze impossible to read. "You realize what you're asking," he said, not looking at me, fingers deftly adjusting knobs that sent ripples through the device's low-frequency hum. "This isn't just about listening anymore. We're poking at the very fabric of the liminal space. One wrong move and the feedback could be catastrophic." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words settle over me like the relentless storm outside. "I know the risks, Kalen, but if we don't try, the voices. The people trapped there, they'll suffer in silence forever." He finally turned to face me, a shadow of a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Idealism suits you, Elias, but you've been involved in this research longer than you know. There are stakes far beyond your empathy." The atmosphere between us thickened, charged with unspoken truths. Mara sat quietly in the corner, her sharp eyes betraying her concern. She didn't say a word, but her presence reminded me that I wasn't alone in this, though trust was still a fragile currency in this city. Kalen placed a hand on the device, his fingers trembling slightly. This is an experimental stabilizer designed to anchor the frequency, not just capture it, but hold it steady long enough for coherent communication. But it draws heavily on the city's electromagnetic flux. If the storm intensifies unexpectedly, the city will shake, I finished, knowing all too well the consequences. The storms weren't just weather. They were the pulse of the liminal space itself, unpredictable and violent. We spent hours calibrating the machine, each adjustment met with a symphony of static, crackles, and distorted voices that seemed to leak from another reality. The device responded, its humming deepening into a resonant chord that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. "It's working," Mara whispered, stepping closer to the screens, displaying fluctuating waveforms that danced like ghostly specters. But beneath the excitement, a knot of doubt twisted in my gut. Kellen's eyes betrayed a flicker of hesitation, a secret kept close to his chest. I wondered what price he had already paid for this knowledge, and what price we were about to pay. The storm outside raged louder, as if reacting to our intrusion. The boundaries between worlds felt thinner than ever, fragile strands of static threading through the air, whispering promises and threats alike. As the night deepened, our uneasy alliance solidified. Kellen's technology gave me a new weapon against the silence, but also a new enemy in the form of unknown consequences. The gamble to stabilize the liminal space was set, and I was about to find out if hope could survive in the eye of the storm. "We move forward," I said, voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "Together." Kalen nodded, but his eyes remained distant, haunted by shadows I couldn't yet comprehend. Mara reached out, placing a steady hand on my shoulder, a silent vow of solidarity as the lab filled once more with the eerie song of unfathomable frequencies. The game had changed. The static was no longer just noise. It was a battleground, and I was ready to fight. The hum of the city's unending static was a constant companion. But tonight, amidst the buzzing machines and tangled cables of my studio, something shifted. I had spent countless hours dissecting the indecipherable chaos, chasing fragments of sound that teased the edge of comprehension. Now, with the device I'd cobbled together from scavenged parts and relentless tinkering, the hidden broadcast trembled into focus like a fragile thread pulling me toward the unknown. The device was a maze of circuitry, a hybrid amplifier designed not just to boost signal strength, but to filter the noise with a precision I hadn't dared hope for. Dr. Sato had helped me calibrate the electromagnetic lenses, his pale fingers steady despite the flickering uncertainty in his eyes. Mara hovered nearby, her sharp gaze scanning the room for any sign of danger or malfunction, her loyalty a steady anchor in the swirling storm of my obsession. As the first clear voice slipped through, a taut silence fell over the studio. The sound was faint but unmistakably human, a trembling whisper laced with desperation and raw fear. It reached into the core of me, and for a moment, the static ceased to be mere interference. It became a veil, thin and fragile, concealing a world of silent suffering. "Help us," the voice pleaded, fragile as a dying breath. "We're trapped. Please." I froze, breath caught in my throat. Mara's hand brushed my arm, grounding me as the weight of their words settled over us like a shroud. The voices weren't just echoes of some lost broadcast. They were alive, ensnared in a liminal space I barely understood. "Elias," Mara whispered, "we need to be careful. This isn't just data. It's people." Her pragmatism was a balm and a challenge. Could I truly protect us both and still chase the truth? The question gnawed at me as I adjusted the controls, coaxing the device to peel back further layers of static, Dr. Sato's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. You're delving deeper than any safe boundary tonight. The electromagnetic fluctuations could destabilize the liminal space or you. I met his pale gaze, the scientist's warning a cold thread weaving through my determination. But the voices called to me, their fragile pleas echoing inside the hollows left by my own loss. They were trapped, just like my sibling had been, lost to the storms that had shaped this city's dark soul. Over hours that bled into the early morning, the broadcast grew clearer, voices layering into a tapestry of pain and hope. I could hear their stories, fractured, fragmented, but painfully real. They spoke of confinement, of silence forced by shadows beyond the storms, and of an aching desire to reach out, to connect, to be freed. Each message was a shard of emotion, stabbing through my defenses. I recorded them obsessively, the tapes filling with spectral echoes that felt less like signals and more like haunted memories. But the breakthrough came at a cost. The emotional weight pressed down on me, dragging my mind into a tempest of guilt and fear. I questioned my sanity as the voices blended with memories and nightmares, blurring the line between mission and madness. Mara confronted me one evening, her voice steady but edged with concern. Elias, you can't carry this alone. You're slipping away. I nodded, unwilling to admit the truth, that the voices had become a mirror, reflecting my own fractured soul back at me. Yet, beneath the despair, a stubborn flame of hope burned bright. The device was a bridge, fragile but real, and I was the only one who could hold it steady. As the city's storms raged outside, I made a silent vow. I would listen. I would try to understand. And somehow, I would find a way to answer their calls, even if it meant losing myself in the static forever. The first step was clear, to pierce the veil and reach out, to turn the haunting whispers into a chorus of rescue. But the silence that followed the last transmission was thick with uncertainty, a reminder that every discovery would come with shadows. The resonance of the voices had changed everything, and nothing could prepare me for what lay ahead. And yet, I could not turn back. Not now. The storm outside thundered in a relentless rhythm, but inside, a new signal hummed, a fragile promise threaded through the static, waiting to be answered. The studio was alive tonight, but not with life. It breathed in static, exhaled distortion. Elias sat hunched over his array of devices, the room dimly lit by the dull glow of monitors, and the erratic flicker of neon bleeding through the grimy window. The hum of the city's relentless electrical storms was always there, a constant companion. But now the static seemed less like background noise, and more like an entity, a presence that curled around the edges of his consciousness, whispering, beckoning. He adjusted the dial on his receiver with trembling fingers, eyes fluttering as the signals warped and twisted, transforming the usual white noise into something disturbingly alive. A pattern emerged, or so he thought at first. Fleeting whispers, sharp bursts of unintelligible speech, and then silence that pressed heavy against his eardrums. His heartbeat quickened, thudding in his chest like a warning drum. Elias. Mara's voice cut through the haze, firm but gentle. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. You've been at this for hours. You need to rest. He shook his head, the static inside his skull rising to a crescendo. They're trying to speak through it, Mara. I can hear them, the trapped voices. But the interference, it's warping everything. I can't tell what's real anymore. Mara stepped inside, closing the door against the storm's howl outside. You're letting it get to you, she said softly. This obsession, it's breaking you. I'm worried. Elias's gaze flickered to her, eyes wild but pleading. If I don't find the truth, if I don't reach them, what happens then? I can't lose them, not like I lost. His voice cracked, the weight of his past loss bleeding into the present. Mara moved closer, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone, Elias, but you have to hold on to yourself first." The room seemed to tilt as Elias closed his eyes, the static merging with the memories that haunted him. The voices overlapping with his own thoughts, a chaotic symphony that threatened to drown his sanity. He opened his eyes to the dim light, determination warring with exhaustion. Later, outside, the storm raged with a deafening fury. Elias wandered the wet streets, neon signs flickering above, their colors bleeding into each other like spilled ink. The city was a fractured mirror, reflecting his fractured mind. Every shadow moved with a life of its own. Every crack in the pavement whispered secrets he was desperate to understand. He paused beneath a flickering street lamp, breathing in the sharp scent of ozone and rain. The static still clung to the air, a ghostly residue that wrapped around his senses. He reached for his recorder, fingers numb but steady, capturing the haunting interference that no one else could hear. Back in the studio, night deepened. Elias sat alone, headphones cocooning his ears in a world of static and silence. The voices came again, fragile and desperate, threading through the noise like fragile threads of a tapestry he was desperate to unravel. His breath was shallow, heart a fragile rhythm in the quiet. He was caught between worlds, the known and the unknown, reality and hallucination, hope and despair. Mara's words echoed in his mind, a tether to reality he clung to desperately. The fractures in his mind were widening, the static threatening to swallow him whole. But beneath the fear, beneath the chaos, a stubborn ember of hope burned bright. There were voices out there, trapped, pleading, waiting, and Elias would find a way to reach them, no matter the cost. But as the storm outside began to wane, the static inside him pulsed louder than ever, a fractured symphony that promised both revelation and ruin. The line between signal and noise, sanity and madness, was vanishing, and Elias stood at the edge, teetering between salvation and oblivion. The night was far from over, and the fractures were only beginning to deepen. The air in the underground archive was stifling, thick with the scent of mold and dust that had settled over countless years of secrecy. I stepped cautiously down the narrow metal staircase, the echo of my boots on the concrete floor swallowed beneath the low drone of the storm that raged relentlessly above. Mara followed quietly, her sharp eyes scanning the dim rows of filing cabinets that stretched like tombstones into the shadows. This place was a mausoleum of forgotten truths, a repository of the city's darkest secrets, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and time. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered sporadically, casting intermittent pools of sickly yellow illumination over stacks of yellowed folders and brittle documents. Each drawer we opened released a faint, oppressive sigh, as if the archive itself resented our intrusion. I felt a chill that wasn't just from the cold. It was the weight of history pressing down on us, the knowledge that what we sought to uncover had been deliberately concealed. Mara handed me a faded file, labeled simply Project Threshold, the edges frayed and stained. As I flipped through its pages, the illegible scrawl of bureaucrats and the stark typewritten reports began to paint a picture I had only glimpsed in fragments before. The city's electrical storms, I learned, had not always been mere weather phenomena. Decades ago, during the earliest recorded tempests, inexplicable events had been logged disappearances, anomalous electromagnetic readings, and distortions in reality itself. These incidents had prompted the formation of a covert government agency, an organization known only in these documents as the Silent Authority. The Silent Authority's mandate was chilling in its clarity: to monitor, suppress, and if necessary, eliminate any knowledge or evidence of alternate dimensions intersecting with our own. The documents described a world where dimensions overlapped, fragile thresholds that could be breached by untrained minds or reckless technology. The agency employed surveillance drones, signal jammers, and psychological operations designed to keep the populace ignorant and compliant. As I digested this, a tremor of unease crept through me. This was no longer an abstract mystery. It was a calculated suppression of truth, a war waged in silence beneath the city's ceaseless storms. I glanced at Mara, whose expression was unreadable but resolute. "They knew," she said softly, "all along. And they're still watching." The weight of isolation pressed in. I was no longer just a sound engineer, chasing whispers in the static. I was now a man hunted by an invisible enemy, determined to keep the veil intact. Yet the more I uncovered, the more my obsession deepened. These voices from beyond the storm weren't just echoes. They were cries for salvation from a realm trapped and forgotten. Suddenly, the flicker of light caught my attention. Across the room, a figure emerged from the shadows, Dr. Kalen Sato, his pale face illuminated by the cold glow of a handheld scanner. His presence was both a relief and a puzzle. "You shouldn't be here?" he murmured, voice low but urgent. "The more you dig, the more unstable the signals become. The liminal space is delicate. Interference could collapse the boundary entirely." I swallowed hard, feeling the full gravity of his warning. But retreat was not an option. Not when the truth was so close, when the voices begged for rescue. Together, we scanned the records, cross-referencing electromagnetic data with historical storm activity and agency operations. Patterns emerged, signatures of temporal overlaps, instances of data hauntings recorded in classified logs, and the unsettling realization that the silent authority's suppression extended beyond surveillance into active manipulation of reality itself. Mara's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "We need to be careful," she said, her usual pragmatism tempered by genuine concern. "If they catch wind of this, it won't just be our equipment at risk." Her words were a sobering reminder of the stakes. Yet, my mind raced with possibility. If these records were accurate, then the city was a nexus, a threshold point between worlds, buffeted by the storms and the static that had become my obsession. Hours passed in the archive's oppressive stillness as we pieced together fragments of a history designed to be forgotten. Each revelation was a shard of light in the darkness, but also a step deeper into a labyrinth of deception and danger. As I closed the final file, the storm outside reached a crescendo, lightning fracturing the sky with jagged fury. The city's hum of static seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat, a reminder that the boundary between worlds was thin and trembling. I felt Mara's hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "we face it together." Her loyalty was a balm to my fraying resolve, but I knew the path ahead would test us both. The silent authority was no mere myth. It was the shadow beneath the noise, a sentinel determined to keep the silence. And I was the one who had dared to listen. The archive door slammed shut behind us as we ascended back into the city's charged night, the secrets we carried heavier than the storm itself. With every step, the question loomed, how deep did this conspiracy run, and what price would I pay to expose the truth? The static whispered answers. I could almost grasp promises of rescue, or warnings of oblivion. The storm was no longer just a backdrop. It was the battleground where realities collided and destinies were forged. And I was caught in the eye of it all, a lone sound engineer chasing the fading echoes beneath the noise. The city groaned under the weight of the electrical storm. Outside the lab's grimy windows, jagged forks of lightning ripped across the sky, illuminating the rain-soaked streets in harsh, fleeting flashes. The hum of static was louder than ever, a relentless, omnipresent drone that filled every crevice of the city's battered skyline. Inside, the atmosphere was just as charged, but with a different kind of electricity, the raw, desperate energy of men racing against time. Elias Vorn crouched over the console, his lean fingers flying across dials, sliders, and switches. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill of the storm, his dark hair damp and matted. Beside him, Dr. Kalen Sato adjusted a series of antennas and coils, his pale face tense beneath the glare of flickering fluorescent lights. "The storm's electromagnetic flux is off the charts," Sato murmured, voice tight. "If we can synchronize our receivers to the pulses, we might amplify the liminal space's signal enough for a stable transmission. But it's a razor's edge. One miscalculation, and we lose everything." Elias nodded, eyes scanning the fluctuating waveforms on the monitors. The hidden frequency, the one that carried the fragile, desperate voices from beyond, was quivering with unprecedented intensity. The storm was both a curse and a gift, its fury threatening to tear the city apart, even as it provided the raw energy needed to reach through the static veil. "We have to try," Elias said, voice low but resolute. "This could be our only chance to stabilize the channel long enough to send a clear message." Outside, the thunder rumbled like a distant beast, growing louder with each heartbeat. The storm's fury was no longer just an environmental hazard. It was a living, breathing force intertwined with the city's strange liminal fabric. Elias could feel it in his bones, a vibration that pulsed in time with the hidden voices clamoring for rescue. Meanwhile, in a cramped safe house across the city, Mara Lynn's sharp eyes scanned a cluttered wall of monitors and radios. Her short hair was plastered to her head from the damp air, but her voice remained steady as she barked orders into an encrypted radio. "Jocks, status report. Are the signal jammers still active?" Static crackled back, followed by Jocks's gravelly voice. "They're tightening the noose. Crow's drones are swarming the eastern sector. We're holding for now, but the authorities not backing down." Mara's jaw clenched. Protecting Elias and their fragile network had become a perilous dance on a knife's edge. Every transmission risked detection. Every movement could trigger a crackdown. Yet the voices, those faint echoes beyond the storm, demanded their attention, their intervention. Back in the lab, Elias and Sato worked feverishly, aligning antennas to catch the storm's surging pulses. The monitors flickered as power surged through the equipment, the air thick with ozone and tension. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. The room plunged into darkness as the citywide blackout took hold, a calculated strike by the silent authority to sever their connection. "Damn it," Elias hissed, fumbling for a flashlight. The cold beam cut through the gloom, revealing Sato's pale face etched with frustration. "They're jamming our signals," Sato said grimly. "We need to ride out the blackout, wait for the next surge." Elias's breath hitched as the storm's roar outside seemed to swell, filling the silence with a chaotic symphony. Then, through the static in his headphones, the hidden broadcast surged, clearer, stronger, and piercing through the chaos like a fragile beacon. Ghostly voices whispered through the crackling noise, their tones laden with pain, hope, and a desperate yearning for rescue. Elias's heart pounded as he adjusted the controls, struggling to maintain the tenuous link. "We're through," he whispered, eyes wide with awe. "The liminal space, it's holding, just for a moment." Sato nodded, his usual reserve melting into a rare smile. This is it, but the victory was bittersweet. The storm raged on, the city plunged in darkness, and the unseen eyes of the silent authority weighed heavier than ever. Outside, Mara's voice crackled over the radio, steady and unwavering, a lifeline amidst the tempest. "Elias, hold on. We're not done yet." The moment hung suspended, a fragile thread connecting worlds, a fleeting bridge forged in the heart of a signal storm. But the question remained, could they stabilize this gateway long enough to save the voices trapped beyond? Or would the creeping darkness of control and silence snuff them out forever? The storm showed no signs of abating. Neither did Elias's determination. The battle for connection, for truth, and for rescue had entered its most perilous phase yet. And as the city trembled beneath the storm's wrath, the silent voices waited, hoping, pleading, for a salvation that might come at a price no one could yet foresee. A storm was just